Good day, everyone. I am Mrs. Manilin Tarok, and I'm going to report about the validity and reliability. So, what is validity? A validity refers to the appropriateness, the meaningfulness, the correctness, and usefulness of the inferences a researcher makes. So, validity is the most important idea to consider when preparing or selecting an instrument for use. So, more than anything else, researchers want the information they obtain through the use of an instrument to serve their purposes. So, for example, to find out what teacher in a particular school district think about a recent policy passed by the school board, researchers need both an instrument to record the data and some sort of assurance that the information obtained will able to draw a correct conclusions about the teacher's opinion. So the drawing of the correct conclusions based on the data obtained from an assessment in what validity is all about. So then next is validation. So the validation is the process of collecting and analyzing evidence to support such interference. The validity refers to the degree to which evidence supports any inferences a researcher makes based on the data he or she collects using a particular instrument. It is the inferences about the specific uses of an instrument that are validated, not the instrument itself. So these inferences should be appropriate, should be meaningful, correct, and useful. So an appropriate inferences would be one that is relevant, that is related to the purposes of the study. So if the purpose of the study was to determine what students know about African culture, for example, it would make no sense to make inferences about this form. So their score on a test about on the physical geography of the Africa. Then we have meaningful inference. So it is one that says something about the meaning of the information, such as the test scores obtained to use the instrument. So what exactly does a high score on a particular test mean? What does such a score allows us to say about the individual who received it? So in what way is an individual who receives a high score different from one who receives a low score, and so on and so forth? So then we have the useful inferences. So it is one that helps the researchers makes a decision related to what they were trying to find out. So researchers interested in the effects of inquiry that related to the teaching materials on the students' achievement. So for example, the need of information that will enable them to infer whether the achievement is affected by such materials, and if so, then how? And the validity, therefore, depends on the amount and the type of evidence there is to support the interpretations the researcher wish to make concerning data they have collected. So the crucial question is, do the results of the assessment provide useful information about the topic of the variable being measured? And what kind of evidence might a researchers collect? So essentially, there are three main types, no? Three main types of evidence. So first is the content-related evidence of validity. So this one, it refers to the content and the format of the instrument. So how appropriate is the content? So these are the questions ani nga content-related evidence. How comprehensive does it logically get an intended variable? How equally does the sample of the items or questions represents the content to be answered? So is the format appropriate? So the content and the format must be consistent with the definition of the variable and the sample of the subjects to be measured. So, mo ito is a content-related evidence of validity. Okay, and how does one obtain the content? So, on the related evidence of validity. So, a common way to do this is to have someone look at the content and the format of the instrument and judge whether or not is appropriate. So, the someone, of course, should be not just be anyone, but rather an individual who can be expected to render an intelligent judgment about the adequacy of the instrument. In other words, someone who knows enough about what is to be measured to be a competent judge. So, and the usual procedure is what follows. So, the researchers write out the definition of what she or he wants to measure and then gives this definition, along with the instrument and a description of the intended sample, to one or more judges. The judges look at the definition, read over the items or questions in the instrument, and place a check mark in front of each question or item that they feel does not measure one or more aspects of the definition. Example, the objectives. So, or the other criteria. So, they also place a check mark in front of each aspect not assessed by any item. So, in addition, the judges evaluate the appropriateness of the instrument format. The researcher then rewrite and the item or the question, so check and resubmits it to the judges and rewrites or writes new items for the criteria not adequately covered. So this continue until the judges approval all the items or the question in the instrument and also indicate that they feel the total number of items is adequate and the representation of the total domain of the content covered by the variable being measured. So next, number 2 is the criterion-related evidence of validity. So this one, it refers to the relationship between the scores obtained using the instrument and the scores obtained using one or more other instrument or measure. And this is also called or often called criterion. So, and how strong is this relationship? How well do such scores estimate the present or predict the future performance of a certain type? So, to obtain this criterion-related evidence validity, the researchers usually compare the performance of one instrument, the instrument that is being validated, with performance on some other. That is called independent criterion. So our criterion is a second test or other assessment procedure presumed to measure the same variables. So for example, if an instrument has been designed to measure academic ability, so the student's scores on the instrument might be compared with their grade point average. So, and of course, there are two forms of criterion-related validity. First is the predictive validity and the second is concurrent validity. So, to obtain the evidence of predictive validity, the researchers allow a time eternal to elapse between administration of the instrument and obtaining the criterion scores. So, for example, a researcher might administer a science aptitude test to a group of high school students. So, and later, compare their scores on the test with their end of semester grades in the science courses. So, on the other hand, when the instrument data and the criterion data gathered at nearly the same time and the results are compared with, this is an attempt by the researchers to obtain the evidence of the concurrent validity. So, example, when a researcher administers a self-esteem inventory to a group of 8th graders and compares their scores on it with the teacher's rating of the student, the self-esteem obtained at about the same time. So next is the correlation coefficient. So this one, it symbolizes by the letter R, no, and it indicates the degree of relationship that exists between the scores individuals obtain on the instrument. So, ang positive relationship, it is indicated when a high scores on one of the group instruments is accompanied by a high score on the other. Then, a negative relationship is indicated when a high scores on one instrument is accompanied by low score on the other and vice versa. And all correlation coefficients fall somewhere between negative 1 and positive 1. Then an R, or the correlation coefficient of 0.00, indicates that no relationship exists. So when a correlation coefficient is used to describe the relationship between a set scores obtained by the same group of individuals on a particular instrument and their scores on some criterion measure, it is called validity coefficient. For example, a validity coefficient of positive 1 or plus 1.00 obtained by correlating a set scores of on mathematics aptitude tests. This one is the predictor, and the other set scores this time on mathematics achievement, the criterion. For the same individual in the group had exactly the same relative standing on both measures. So such correlation, if obtained, would allow the researcher to predict perfectly math achievement based on the aptitude test scores. So although this correlation coefficient would be very unlikely, and it illustrates what such coefficient mean. So the higher the validity coefficient obtained, the more accurate a researcher's predictions are likely to be. So then, let's move on to the number 3. Number 3 type of evidence, the construct-related evidence of validity. So this one, it refers to the nature of the psychological construct or the characteristic being measured by the instrument. This one, it is the broadest of the 3 categories of evidence for validity that we are considering. So there is no single piece of evidence that satisfies the construct-related evidence of validity. Rather, the researchers attempt to collect a variety of different types of evidence. So because the more and more the varied, the better. So that will allow them to make warranted inferences to assert. So for example here, that the scores obtained from administering a self-esteem inventory permit accurate inferences about the degree of self-esteem that people who receive those scores possess. Usually, there are 3 types involved in obtaining construct-related evidence of validity. First is the variable being measured should be clearly defined. Then number 2, the hypothesis based on a theory underlying the variable are formed about how people who possess a lot versus a little of the variable will behave in a particular situation. And number 3, the hypotheses are tested both logically and empirically. So, for example here, suppose a researcher interested in developing a pencil and a paper test to measure the honesty wants to use a validity approach. So, first, he defines honesty. Next, he formulates a theory about how honest people behave as compared to dishonest people. So, for example, he might theorize that honest individuals, if they find an object that does not belong to them, will make a reasonable effort to locate the individual to whom the object belongs. So, based on this theory, the researcher might hypothesize that individuals who score high on his honesty test will be more likely to attempt to locate the owner of an object defined than individual who score low on the test. So the researchers then administers the honesty test. Now separates the names of those who score high and those who scores low. So and gives all them an opportunity to be honest. So he might, for example, leave a wallet with $5 in it lying just outside the test taking room so that the individuals taking the test can easily see it and pick it up. So the wallet displays the name and the phone number of the owner in a plain view. So if the researcher's hypothesis is sustained, so more of a high score than the low scores on the honesty test will attempt to call the owner of the wallet. So and this could be checked by having the number answered by the recording machine asking the caller to leave her name and the number. So this is a one piece of evidence that could be used to support the inferences about the honesty of the individuals based on the scores they receive on this test. So next, let's move on to the reliability. So the reliability, it refers to the consistency of the scores obtained. How consistent that they are for each individual form from one administration of an instrument to another and from one set of items to another. So consider this one. For example, a test designed to measure typing ability. If the test is reliable, we would expect a student who receives a high score the next time he takes the test, the scores would probably not be identical, but this should be close. And the scores obtained from an instrument can be quite reliable but not valid. Suppose a researcher gave a group of 8th graders two forms of tests designed to measure their knowledge of the Constitution of the United States and found their scores to be consistent. So those who scored high on Form A also score high on Form B. Those who scored low on A scored low on B and so on. So, and we would say that the scores were reliable. Then we have the errors of measurement. So whenever the people take the same twice, they will seldom perform exactly the same. That is, their scores or answer will not usually be identical. This may be due to a variety of factors. It could be because of the differences in motivation, in the energy, because of the anxiety, or because of the different testing situation and so on. So, and this is inevitable. So, such factors result in errors of measurement. So, tawag ato is the errors of measurement. So, because errors of measurement are always present to some degree. So, researchers expect some variation in the test scores, example in the answers or in the ratings. So, when an instrument is administered to the same group more than once, when two different forms of an instrument are used, or even from one part of an instrument to another. So there are three ways to estimate reliability. First is the retest method. So this involves administering the same test twice to the same group after a certain time interval has elapsed. So a reliability coefficient is then calculated to indicate the relationship between the two sets of scores obtained. The reliability coefficient will be affected by the length of the time that elapses between the two administration of the test. So the longer the time interval, the lower the reliability coefficient is likely to be. Since there is a greater likelihood of changes in the individual taking the test. So in taking or in checking for evidence of retest reliability, an appropriate time interval should be selected. So these intervals should be that during which individuals would be assumed to retain the relevant position in a meaningful group. So that's all. Thank